Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and joining us here tonight in this studio to shed more light on this issue is Dr. Mohamed Roshdy, the investment expert and also the lecturer at Cairo University. Dr. Roshdy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to take opportunity to wish the new year brings a lot of success and sound health for Egyptian citizens and presidential leadership. God bless Egypt.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start talking and discussing our topic with Dr. Roshdy, we're joined now over the phone by Dr. Youmn Hamaqi, the professor of economics at Ain Shams University. Dr. Hamaqi, can you hear us?
Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Hamaqi. Dr. Hamaqi, now Egypt has reached $31 billion in exports for the year 2021, which is a giant leap in Egypt's level of exports. Now, how do you explain this rise, this sharp rise in the Egyptian exports to the international market?
Actually, we can consider that as a good progress regarding export of Egypt, since, we used to have export the last year with $28 billion. So by increasing this figure into 31, this is can be considered as a good progress. Actually, despite that, the potentialities for the Egyptian economy to increase export is exceeding this figure by large percentage, according to our studies as economists, that Egypt is having very good potentialities in different sectors regarding different industries, like ready-made clothes, like food industries, like even electronics. Egypt succeeded to build, competitiveness in such products. So I believe that by just enhancing the role of the informal sector in the industrial sector, as well as addressing obstacles confronting investors, especially the private sector, I believe that this figure can increase more than that, far than this figure.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Hamaqi, now how did we achieve this rise even during the coronavirus?
I can't hear you. The voice is not clear.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Hamaqi?
Yes.
Now, how did we actually reach this level of exports, even though the whole international and global market has been hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic since the first wave, second, third, and fourth wave, yet we've reached probably one of the highest levels of exports in Egyptian history. How did we overcome these obstacles?
Actually, this happened by, first of all, that Egypt has benefited from coronavirus by the defects that happened to the value chains. And Egypt benefited from such defect by providing the international market with the product demanded. So this is part of the reasons. Another one is regarding facilitating, procedures of export by the government, because nowadays we have a good support from the government and our president. Nowadays, today our president had a meeting with economic group, ministerial economic group, to discuss the importance of enhancing export from one perspective, and from another, increasing the local content for the industrial sector. And I believe this is a very important tendency towards moving into the structural reform. Since Egypt has succeeded to achieve the monetary and financial reform starting from 2016 with support of the IMF, and nowadays we are trying to shift into the structural reform in order to generate more opportunities for job and to combat poverty And the last visit of our president to Upper Egypt can be a signal, a very important signal, to mention how the Egyptian economy is trying nowadays to enhance and increase the productive capacities existing everywhere by shedding the light on to how extent infrastructure and transportation can add to the competitiveness of exploiting our resources all over Egypt. Part of it is Upper Egypt that is full of resources but are not exploited yet.
Mm-hmm. Now, Doctor, how much of an increase do we expect now year on year? So for 2022, what sort of level, what sort of number do you think the Egyptian economy can export to the international market if we just hit or exceed a little bit over $31 billion for the next year? What is the figure that Egypt is aiming for?
Yes, the goal of the government is by specifying a figure of $100 billion for the 3 years. For 3 years, actually, but we are about to finish these 3 years. Still, if we consider the years of the pandemic can be excluded, and we want to extend that into another 3 years. So I believe that the potentialities for our industrial sector can reach that goal when we take into consideration productive capacities that are not exploited by trying to mainstream the informal sector, specifically in ready-made clothes. We have very good potentialities for food industries. This year, the food industry achieved $3.8 billion only for the 10 months of this according to statistics of the 10 months of 2021, which means that there is very large potentialities taking into consideration African markets as well as Arab markets. So still a lot to be done regarding facilitating the procedures of export, facilitating finance for small business, to improve the competitiveness, trying to increase the local content so that this can be considered as enhancing competitiveness, since importation of such intermediate goods can increase the cost of the production. So by enhancing local content of our production, this may help a lot to achieve the competitiveness.
Yes. Dr. Youmn Hamaqi, the Professor of Economics at Ain Shams University, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Dr. Roshdy, we have this aim of $100 billion that should be achieved in 3 or 4 years. Now, we've just exceeded $31 billion. Before we start talking about reaching that $100 billion, what sort of products did we export most for the year 2021 that actually helped reach or exceed the $31 billion mark?
Actually, I would like to start our topic today with one of the quotes for one of the French writers, Antoine de Saint. Tout objectif sans plan qu'un souhait, which means, c'est en français, but it means in anglais or in English, a goal without a plan is just a wish. What actually the President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has an ambitious plan to raise Egyptian non-petroleum exports to reach $100 billion over the next 3 to 4 years. Actually, this is a crucial thing. Before going to the products which increase our exports to reach this number, to reach $31 billion as an exports, I believe that this is we are being the fruits of a lot of things, and I would like to take you and our audience through the Egyptian journey. I believe we have to enjoy the journey as much as the destination. Actually, to reach this think we did a great job, especially during the last 7 years in different fields. As I told you and our audience, we are being the fruits for a lot of things, and we have an ambitious plan to gain more and more. Actually, we did in a lot of fields, economically, legally, health, education, energy, infrastructure, mega projects, external affairs, especially the monetary system, digital transformation, and FDI. Actually, President Sisi succeeded to overcome a lot of political and economic issue during the last 7 years. I would like to start the point with you and our audience from the first point, which is the economic reform. Actually, after the devaluation, the government succeeded under the strategic vision of the presidential leadership and the government to absorb the excess of liquidity and to play a great role with their interest rate. Actually, the inflation reached, as far as I recall, after the devaluation, reached around 33%. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Currently, the inflation rate decreased to reach 6.6 to 6.5%. That's what we are doing now. How they did this? Actually, this is through a lot of pillars. We build our strategy through actually the inverted yield curve, playing on decreasing the cost of debt, the FX rate. Currently, you can imagine that the FX rate is fixed for almost 1 year. Can you imagine that?
Yes, yes.
And we faced a lot of problems actually during the last 10 years, that there's a difference in foreign currency or FX rate between the official market or banks and the non-official or unofficial market. Currently, there is no gap. Just 2 to 5 piastres the gap, which is the normal, the accepted, and all of those things are monitored by the government. Can you imagine something like that? This is in addition to the new investment law, the financial inclusion. Part of this, which is the financial inclusion, which is to absorb the gray economy to combine it with the official economy. Yes.
Well, Dr. Roshdy, now a lot of the economies around the world, they've been hard hit by the pandemic, and they probably have not been producing as much over the past couple of years, which also gave a chance for the Egyptian market to export its products even more. Do you think now, with some sort of a global economic recovery, Egypt might face a bit of a competition with the global economies over the international market?
I believe that Egypt and the presidential leadership and all sectors in our country played a great role to overcome this pandemic. This is what they are calling the how to manage crisis, the crisis management. Actually, we can see this is reflected on our numbers. Actually, you can imagine that the developed countries, they achieved a negative growth rate, GDP growth rate. Actually, we achieved 2% growth rate last year. How we succeeded to overcome this? This is through good plan for how to overcome this crisis. Actually, first the government played on the how to manage citizen behavior and increase the awareness and try to have the social distancing, and we played a great role how to manage the curfew without stopping production.
Yes.
This is a great challenge. We can see developed countries in Europe, they lock down they locked down actually the curfew, but we succeeded to manage the curfew for like 6, 8 hours, 10 hours, and at the same time we have an exception for people who is producing factories. This is one of the important things to provide our nation or our citizen with the needs. You know that we have to cover on such pandemics the physiological needs like food and beverage. Those are crucial.
Yes.
Some countries, they don't have the luxury of this. Can you imagine at Europe and UK? One of my friends told me we are in the supermarkets, we couldn't find a lot of things, despite the fact one of them, they told me they couldn't find the paper toilet. Can you imagine how they reach it? This is actually, I believe that Egypt did a great job to manage this crisis, and this is actually which is reflected on our GDP growth rate.
Yes. Well, one of the reasons that the Egyptian market has exported much higher than in previous years was due to the trade agreements. Many trade agreements have been established between our government and other governments around the world. But even today, during the President's meeting with the Ministerial Economic Group, he really emphasized the importance of encouraging the small and medium enterprises into really getting engaged into the exportation activity. Now, what sort of encouragement and facilities will the government provide for the small and medium enterprises to increase their exports?
In my humble opinion, if you would like to build healthy economy, you have to start with the household segment, and this is the key. The household segment actually are the key to develop the country and to build a strong economic. I would like to highlight this with an example. If the economy of any country is built on 2 huge companies, for example, if one of them is defaulted or there's a bankruptcy, what will happen? We will lose 50% of our economy. But if we depended on a lot of companies, small or medium companies, we are mitigating the risk. If one of them defaulted, what will happen? We can overcome. The impact is not that huge. As you know, we shouldn't put all eggs in one basket. Actually, this is what the government is focusing on. How they did this? They did this smartly. They started the first thing when they decreasing after the devaluation, they decreased the interest rate. Why they decrease the interest rate? Despite the fact that the government is focusing to decrease the cost of debt. One of the crucial things, if you would like to motivate people to get their money and invest and create jobs for people and decrease the unemployment rate, which reached, as far as I recall, in 2013, like 14%. Currently, it reached 7%. Can you imagine what the government, to turn back to our point, what the government did? They encouraged people to get their money and invested in the market to create jobs by decreasing the interest rate. And then what happened after that? They added a lot of things and they created a lot of initiatives. One of the most important initiatives, which is the SMEs initiatives, that the Central Bank of Egypt adopting it.
Yes.
This was a crucial thing that to motivate people and to finance youth and women. This is which aligned with the initiative of the presidential leadership to empower women in addition to youth. Those are the future of any country. And I believe that the African continent are lucky if you can easily realize that by if you see the pyramid of age for African countries and European countries, you can easily see that the majority of the people in African countries are youth. When you are doing those, one of them will be the entrepreneur who create his own business and doing a lot of things. The government adopted the SMEs initiatives and provided those youth and women and with low interest rate.
Yes.
This is little bit let the economic cycle wheel to move rapidly, despite the fact if we see on the previous decades, we can realize easily that the majority of the investment in our country was created by huge companies and huge investors.
Yes. Dr. Roshdy, now Egypt is also, during its presidency of the COMESA, it really aims to increase its exports to the African states, members of the COMESA at least, by 50%. Now, Africa's consumption spending stands at $4.5 billion, and it is forecasted to reach $6 billion by 2025. So, do you think that Egypt also should focus much more on the African states in general, maybe in specific the COMESA members? And this is in light of Egypt's efforts in strengthening its trade ties and its even political ties with all the African states over the past years. So now there should be much more of a focus on African states in terms of exporting the products.
Actually, the presidency of the COMESA in 2001 participated in increasing independent cooperation with countries of the grouping in many fields, which supported the strategic direction of the Egyptian state towards the continent. Moreover, Egypt's assumption of this seat will contribute to strengthening a great efforts for achieving economic integration in the continent of Africa and overcoming obstacles that may hinder free trade between COMESA member states. In addition to cooperation between investments agents in Africa and opening a channel of communication between state governments and the representative in private sector to drive movement of investment with the content. Actually, the total export subsidy in 2021 reached to about 6.9 billion, from which 1,355 companies benefited from it. Egypt returned back to play its vital role in our content, its historical role to focus on the economic part, the political part, and play on its strategic location to be a business hub in the future for Africa. And we can realize this easily. A lot of projects and a lot of multinational companies tried, after the stability of the political situation for the last 7 years, after Mr. President Sisi overcome Egypt and leading a lot of things, we sent a positive signal to the global community to come and invest in our country in a great and an efficient way. By this, and this is, by the way, I would like to share just the number for the FDI to know what happened during past 7 years. I would like to share that FDI increased, registered a growth equal to 0.4 of the country nominal GDP in June 2021, compared with a growth equal to 1.5 in the previous quarter. Can you imagine the difference between quarter to quarter? This is what we are harvest based on returning back to play our historical role in the country,
yes,
on the African continent.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely also the industrial exports has played a pivotal role in Egypt's recovery, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.